And I'm going to start from here. So before we get started, I was wondering if there's any questions about the pre-class activity of signing up for an NCBI account and if there were any issues. And feel free to type your questions in the chat throughout the presentation, and we'll be able to, we'll be making these slides and recording available after this presentation as well. So if there's if you're someone who just likes to listen to something and then be able to review materials afterwards, they will be available to you. So bearing that I'm not hearing any questions, and Kim will be monitoring the chat when I'm talking, and I'll be monitoring while Kim's talking. So feel free to add your questions at any time. So let's get started. So at the end of the session, we're hoping that you'll be able to add citations to My Bibliography, understand the sections of an NIH Biosketch, implement the changes for the new Biosketch format, and build a NIH Biosketch master with SciENcv. But first off, what is a Biosketch? Now we have just a quick poll about who has created a Biosketch before, just to get a sense of the room. And Kim's just gonna put that up there. So who has created a Biosketch before? So I'm seeing that the majority has created a Biosketch, but there's some people that are brand new to it. So this is going to be a great session for both. We are going to be going over all the, and if Kim, if you could share the results just so that everybody knows that I'm not fibbing. So we are going to be explaining the details of a Biosketch, but also I think you'll be able to take away some tips, even if you've done Biosketches for a long time. So an NIH Biosketch is required of all NIH and AHRQ applications for research grants, and applicants are encouraged to use SciENcv tool, which we're going to go through today. And if you're curious about what SciENcv stands for, its full name is Science Experts Network Curriculum Vitae. And before we get into SciENcv itself, you will need an NCBI account. And if you have an EraComms account, you want to link it to the NCBI account. And you completed the first step before class, so we're already on our way. The second step is adding your publications, posters, and presentation information to My Bibliography. And Kim is going to walk you through the third step of how to input the information from My Bibliography and your most recent CV, which we ask you to have on hand, into a master Biosketch. So you may have been surprised that to hear us encouraging people to use one of the third-party options to sign into NCBI. And this is because NCBI logins are being retired. And as of June 2021, you must create new NCBI accounts using third-party login information, and starting June 2022, so next year, you will no longer be able to log into NCBI using this NCBI username and password that you may have previously used, like myself. And so what you need to do, this was my primary way of logging into NCBI, is that you need to associate your account with a third-party login option. So to do this, I have posted the instructions on this slide. And as I mentioned earlier, the slides and recording will be shared with everybody who registered for the webinar. And as part of the NCBI login retirement, there is an optional password retirement wizard that appears for those with an NCBI login. So the password retirement will become mandatory starting later this fall, which could be any day now. So I recommend to start doing that transition now. And come June 2022, so next year, all remaining active passwords are going to be retired, and access to any My NCBI accounts without a linked third-party login like Google or EraCommons or Orchid, among many others, you will need to go through a password access retrieval process. And in the pre-class instructions, we asked you to link to the EraComms account. And just quickly using the green check mark and the red X in the reactions, who has an EraComms account? So I'm seeing a few people with the EraComms accounts. Yep. Oh, some people that don't have it. Yeah. So an EraCommons account is when you'll if you don't have one now, then you're going to get one when you apply for your first grant. And so I've included instructions on how to link your ERA account to your NCBI account. And this process is the same as for adding a new linked account for logging into NCBI. So if you do have an EraCommons account now, just be aware that they are also changing their login process and have started requiring two-factor authentication via login.gov for scientific accounts since September 15th of this year. And administrative accounts have until early 2022 before they're required to make the switch as well. But I recommend don't delay. If you want to set up, as long as you just have an administrative account, like myself, you can set up your login.gov account already. And more information is linked on this slide. And if you're lucky to have someone willing to manage your Biosketch for you, and I know there's probably a few people on this call that manage Biosketches for others, you can add them as a delegate on the account settings page, which is the same one for adding linked accounts for access and linking to EraCommons. And you'll have the option of providing access to your My Bibliography or SciENcv or both. And this is the email that delegates will receive, and they will click on the link to confirm. You may be asking yourself why My Bibliography is part of a class on Biosketches and SciENcv. So the reason is that it is the best way to add citations to a Biosketch in SciENcv. In fact, you should add all your publications and presentations and any publications and presentations from grants where you are a PI to My Bibliography, because while there are limits to the numbers of publications and presentations you can have in a Biosketch, there's an option to link to a public My Bibliography page, and this is the only link that you're permitted on a Biosketch. So how do you access My Bibliography? When you're logged into your NCBI account, if you're not brought there immediately, you can access the NCBI dashboard by clicking on My NCBI in the top right-hand corner if you're on an old version of the site, or if you're on a new version of an NCBI site like PubMed, it's just, if you click on your account name, it's going to be the dashboard link there. And I believe currently it no longer says My NCBI in brackets, it just says dashboard. And once you get to that dashboard page, your My Bibliography is going to be in the, usually on the left-hand column. And if you are delegated for somebody else's bibliographies, they're going to show up underneath. So to get into My Bibliography, you'll want to click on that Manage My Bibliography link. And there's also now a new way to access My Bibliography on those new sites like PubMed through the publications link. So when adding citations to My Bibliography, I always recommend pulling article information from PubMed if it is available. If an article you need to add is not in PubMed, you can add it using an RIS file, which is a standard file for citations, which you can export from any citation manager, such as EndNote, Mendeley, Zotero, or a database such as Scopus. Or you can enter the information manually. And all three of these options are available under the Add Citations drop-down menu. I find that I need to enter citation manually for most items that are not journal articles. So this is a great way to add poster and conference presentations, data sets, and software. If you're looking for a place to publish posters, presentation slides, or a data set, we have an institutional repository, eScholarship at UMass Chan, where you can publish any work done at UMass Chan Medical School and receive a DOI and add it to your CV or Biosketch. And bonus, these materials are also discoverable on Google Scholar. So after receiving a grant, My Bibliography can also be used to make sure papers are making their way into PubMed Central to become compliant with the NIH Public Access Policy. And we don't have time to cover this process, but feel free to reach out to us with any questions about the NIH Public Access Policy or to troubleshoot papers that are not in compliance, which are generally marked in red. Another source of information that SciENcv can pull from is Orchid. So using that green check mark and red X again, or a raised hand or a clapping hand, who has an Orchid ID? All right, I'm seeing some people that do have one. Nice, and some people that don't. So an Orchid ID is a way to just a number that can be associated with your name in publications so that you can be distinguished from anybody that has the same name. Or if your name changes over time or has changed over time, it's one way to make sure that all of the publications are associated with the same person. And to enable the linking with your Orchid ID to your NCBI account, this is done in the same way as linking other accounts to NCBI as well. And the NIH, AHRQ, and CDC are now requiring all fellows and trainees to have an Orchid and link it to their EraComms profile. So, and we've linked some instructions on the screen as well. So as I mentioned earlier, we have a few activities during this workshop to practice creating a Biosketch. And if you're creating a Biosketch for yourself, please feel free to go ahead and use these activities to get started on your own Biosketch or update an old Biosketch. So in this first activity, we're going to take 5 minutes to add 1 to 2 publications to your My Bibliography. And if you're creating a practice Biosketch or so if you aren't creating one for yourself, but just want to get experience using My Bibliography and SciENcv, I recommend just choosing 1 or 2 papers of interest, whether they're papers by researchers you know or a topic of interest to you, and add those to your My Bibliography. And if you're working on somebody else's Biosketch, this is also a chance that if there's papers that you know that need to be added to their My Bibliography to go ahead and do that. And feel free to ask questions in the chat as well. Kim, were there any that have come up so far that we should address at this time?
There have been some questions. I've been answering them in the chat. There's a question about getting into an EraComms account that you can no longer get into. If you need to create a new EraComms account, that's something you would go through our Office of
Sponsored Programs.
Thank you. But if you just cannot get into an older account, there is on the login page a reactivate account link that you can try and see if that works first. And then there was another question about finding the account settings within my NCBI. So if you click on your name up in the top right-hand corner, you should be able to get into that. Oh, and then somebody asked about something that you did address later on about adding publications that aren't in PubMed. Oh, and I see I missed a question. I'm sorry about that. What citation format is used in my bibliography? That is a very good question. I'd have to look to see in particular what the citation format is, but it is formatted automatically for you. That's not something that you do. So when you're adding citations manually, you're just filling in boxes and then it appears the way that NCBI has set up My Bibliography. There's a question about getting into NCBI through a Gmail account. Can I link to a UMass Med email as this is linked to my ERA? Yes, you can. In fact, I think I have done something similar.
Yeah, I would recommend going, if you're going to link them, to start by going into your UMass Med email EraComms linked account, and then adding your Gmail as a third-party login option there.
And there has also just come in a question about how you would add an award. And so, Tess, could you kind of use your mouse to circle on the screen there where the add award button is?
Yeah, so you'll see in this example of My Bibliography that there is a button on the right-hand side And the key thing here is that you need to make sure that your EraCommons account is linked. And how you can know this is in the top left-hand corner under My Bibliography, there should be an ERA linked account logo. And you'll notice that that enables for this compliance piece to show up on the right-hand side. And beside the article, you'll be able to add an award. And there's a question about if we should add preprints to our NCBI bibliography, and the answer is yes. They are included as part of the works of scientific works that can be included in biosketches.
And for everyone who's posting about what to do about getting a DOI for a poster presentation, I'm going to paste the link to our repository here in the chat. And there is a process here that you can use to submit your item depending on what part of the university, the medical school you're from, and there's more information on how to do that.
All right. And I see one about funding, but I think maybe we'll leave that till a little bit later on, because I think we need to continue in the interest of time. All right. So now we have prepared our publication. So let's dive into the Biosketch itself. There are some changes, as was mentioned in the advertising for the session, that are coming up for the Biosketch as well. So it's going to take into effect for applications, just-in-time reports, and research performance progress reports, or also known as RIPRs, submitted for due dates on or after May 25th. 2021. So that date has already passed, but it's going to be required starting this coming January 25th, 2022. And the practice Biosketch and instructions we are providing today are based on the new requirements, but we will point out the differences as we go along. We've provided a link to the notice about the changes on this slide. So the standard Biosketch is divided into three sections. Section A, personal statement, Section B, positions, scientific appointments, and honors, which was previously positions and honors, and Section C, contributions to science. Previously, there was a Section D called research report, and this has been removed from the new Biosketch requirements, but there is still a Section D for fellowship Biosketches, but it is for Scholastic Performance. So, and in terms of formatting, Biosketches are still limited to 5 pages, and there's no figures or graphics allowed, so don't embed or attach any files. The SciENcv tool mirrors the structure of the Biosketch. It helps generate a compliant Biosketch by adhering to the required formatting, and also integrates with My Bibliography, EraCommons, and other resources, which we have mentioned and worked with already. And NIH recommends you use it, but it's not required. So to access SciENcv, if you go back to your NCBI dashboard, the SciENcv box in the bottom right-hand corner, where the arrow is pointing, click on the Manage SciENcv if you've created Biosketches in the past using SciENcv, or if you've never created a Biosketch before in SciENcv, click on the Create a New Document link. And so if you were somebody who clicked on the Manage SciENcv, you would have been brought to this page. And once you're created your first Biosketch, this is also the page that you will be brought to. And you'll see the list of the Biosketches that you've created, but let's go ahead and create a new Biosketch. And whenever you're creating a new Biosketch, and this is the page that you would have been brought to if you pressed on the Create a New Document link, I always recommend that you try and pre-populate it as much as possible. And so there's a few different ways that you can do that. So if you're brand new to creating a Biosketch and you have EraCommons linked, you can use EraCommons as your external source. But if this is, you've been doing Biosketches before with SciENcv, you can use a pre-existing Biosketch. That's why we recommend that you have a master, so that you always have a template that you can pull from to start off, because you should be making edits to the Biosketch to make it tailored for the grant that you're applying for. So if to convert an old Biosketch, the new format, you'll notice that all your old Biosketches are going to be going to have the type labeled Old NIH Biosketch. And then any new ones are just going to be called NIH Biosketch. So to update these ones, you can use the process I was describing earlier to use one of your old NIH Biosketches as a template for your new Biosketch. Or if you click into the old Biosketch, for example, I'm going to click into my practice one here. There is a big button that appears and a warning that asks you to upgrade your Biosketch. So if you click that button, it's going to bring you directly back to that same new document screen selected, but it's already selected the existing document. And it generally uses the name of the previous document dash new, but I wanted to be something a little bit more specific with the naming, and I called it V2 or version 2. And SciENcv will keep both copies, so you can always refer back to an old copy if you need to. So if you haven't already, please go ahead and create a blank master Biosketch or convert your current Biosketch to the new format, and we'll give you about 2 to 3 minutes. And if you're creating a practice master Biosketch, we recommend using the NIH Biosketch template. Now I see there's a lot of chat.
Yeah, and I just want to address a question that someone else was nice enough to put an answer to, but if you are having trouble finding the SciENcv, it is on your dashboard page. If you look all the way down, generally in the right-hand corner, that's where you would find how you would get into SciENcv.
Yeah, or you can access it directly through the link that is posted in the chat. Thank you so much.
Yes. Test, do you want to unshare so that I can switch?
Yes.
Okay, are you seeing my slides?
Yes, we are.
Okay. Okay. So now that you have all had a chance to try to create a new Biosketch or taking a look at the basics of getting that started, let's spend some time talking about each of the elements that go into the Biosketch. Well, first, we're going to look very broadly at the sections right here, and then we'll go and focus on each in a little more detail. So we've already seen this basic outline that Tess showed us about the sections of the Biosketch, but these are actually going to vary somewhat based on whether you're applying for a grant or a fellowship. So if you're a faculty member applying for a grant, you will see the education and training section, the personal statement, positions, scientific appointments and honors, and contributions to science. But if you are a student or a postdoc applying for a fellowship, you'll see mostly similar sections, but you will have the addition of section D, which is Scholastic Performance. So we're going to talk about the sections a little out of order, but there's a method to this madness. If you've already written some articles or article drafts, you probably know that rather than writing the paper from start to finish, it can be easier to write it section by section. I know I find it easier to get the methods and the data reporting kind of done first to get myself started before working on the discussion or introduction. And the Biosketch can kind of work the same way. Get the facts written down first, then work on what will take a little more effort. So we're going to first focus on education and training, excuse me, then sections D and B, which is the Scholastic Performance and the positions, appointments and honors. And then we're going to move on to sections A and C, which will take a little more effort. So the information for the education and training section is really going to be the same whether you're applying for a fellowship or a grant. You want to enter any and all post-secondary education, starting with the bachelor's degree or any other early professional training. Depending on where you are in your career, you want to include graduate schools, postdocs, residencies, clinical fellowships, and so on. For each of these, you'll want to include the name and the location of the institution, the degree you received, if that was involved, the month and year of the end date or expected end date, and what the field of study was. Now, if you've already entered all of this information into EraComms and you've linked your accounts, this section may auto-populate, but it's always a good idea to look it over to make sure everything is correct and that everything is included in case you haven't kept EraComms up to date. So if you need to add information manually into SciENcv, there's an education and training section that you will see. You choose add one to have this box pop up. And you can use the degree option here to enter any degrees that you've already earned. And you can choose training to be able to add a postdoc, a residency, or if you're a current graduate student, things like that. Now you can easily add to this list later by choosing add another degree or training. For those of you who may have, who are creating a Biosketch for a fellowship, doing this step first, adding in your education and training is going to make your life a little easier when you get to section D, which is the Scholastic Performance. Now again, this is only a section that's going to appear for fellowships. So faculty members, this isn't going to apply directly to you unless you want to make sure you know how you can help your students and postdocs when they are filling out their biosketches. Now for students and postdocs listening, you are going to need a copy of your transcripts for this. So grad students will need to list all of your undergraduate and graduate courses with year, institution, and grade. And for postdocs, you'll only need to enter the graduate level scientific or professional courses with year, institution, and grade. And here's why it's nice to fill in that education and training section first. If you don't, you are faced with this empty screen for section D, and you will have to add in your education directly here. And I've done some experimenting with this. Adding those education degrees here is a little finicky. It's much easier if you add it into the education and training section, because it will then very nicely autofill the degrees that you entered. And so you can click on each to add the courses and fill in the grades and all of the information. And this is going to take a little time, obviously, especially if you have to go back and enter in all of your undergraduate grades and courses. So moving on to section B, which is positions, scientific appointments, and honors. For those of you who have had a Biosketch before, as Tess mentioned, this is a section that's been updated. You can notice that from the title. You now add in scientific appointments. So this section you'll want to list in chronological order all previous relevant positions. Relevant is the key phrase here. The job in the pizza place that you had during high school doesn't count as relevant. Make sure that they count as scientific professional positions and appointments. Clinicians would want to add licensures, board certifications, any honors that you've received. So for students and postdocs and junior faculty, that could mean scholarships, fellowships, awards, things like that. Did you get inducted into an honor society? That could be something to add. For faculty, you would also want to include any adjunct, visiting, or honorary appointments. Again, if this information is in EraComms, it may auto-populate. Again, always double check to make sure everything is there and everything is correct. Or you can add it directly again into SciENcv. So by adding in the different choices, it will ask you, what was the title? Where was it? When was this happening? Things like that. Yes, so now that we've talked about these different sections, let's take another quick activity so you can get a feel for using SciENcv. Or if you've already done this before, you could do some updating as needed. Let's take 5 minutes or so to add in information to the education section or to section B. I wouldn't recommend doing Scholastic Performance since you really do the transcripts for that. And also, if there are any questions at this point, we can add them or address them while we're doing this activity for a few minutes.
Yeah, so there's been a few questions that have come up, and I think it might be useful. Kim, do you have are you logged into My NCBI right now and have it pulled up?
Should be. Let me see.
Yeah, so if you wouldn't mind just showing, so if you're on to get to SciENcv, if you're on the any sort of NCBI page, sorry, Kim, just slow down a tiny bit.
Sorry.
If you're on a new NCBI page, you can notice that Kim clicked on her username and then went to the dashboard.
So I clicked here, and then here's my dashboard. And this takes you into where you can find lots of different things, including My Bibliography. And are they looking for SciENcv? Is that
yeah, so if you scroll down, and then if you don't have, so Kim and I both have a bunch of biosketches for practice, as well as our own. And so there's going to be biosketches that show up for us. But if you have never created a biosketch before, this is where you would create a new document. And if you, to get to that previous page, it was Manage SciENcv, the button there. And this tool is an NCBI tool. And if you have a biosketch that is in a Word document, you're going to have to create a new document and copy and paste all that information into SciENcv. There's not really an easy way to be able to upload a previous biosketch into SciENcv and just have it all populated. It's a bit of a manual process, but the advantage is that for any subsequent biosketches, you have that information already inputted. So we do have a couple relevant questions about section D and section A as well. Sorry, not section A, section B. How should dual degree programs, MD, PhD, be listed? 1 degree or 2 degrees? I think that is a very good question, and I could not find an answer. I was looking that up while Kim was talking. And so I think that is up to you. And I would probably, depending if you got it's a combined degree at the same, graduated same time with that combined degree, I'd probably just list it as 1, but that's just, I think, personal preference. And courses in progress, my understanding is that you're listing courses that you've completed. I don't think there's, Kim, correct me if I'm wrong, if you can list courses in progress.
That I also don't think you need to do, but I can double check on that. You know, it does say it wants your transcripts, it's your grades and where you took the classes in the past. I would need to check on that actually.
Yeah, so we'll get back to that and we'll send out the answer to that question. Another question about how traineeships, so grants like T32 appointments be listed, if at all, under honors and positions, or it doesn't matter if the traineeship is current or previously expired. So that has recently changed. They're no longer asking you to put your grant information as part of the biosketch. It used to be part of that section D, but that's no longer required. So if you want to talk about your grants, that's where it's going to go into the personal statement, which Kim is going to get to in a moment.
I was just looking here through the degree options to see if there was a PhD, MD choice, which I am not seeing, but there are sort of other doctorate, other choices that you can make. And if you're in training, it's really, you would choose probably graduate student since you are in an MD PhD program.
And so I think in that case, then I would probably split the MD PhD into 2 once you're completed. And there's a question about how we can make sharing private to public for your Biosketch?
No, there is, let me actually go back to here, right here at the top, there's going to be this blue box, and there is a choice for sharing here. So you can share it or not share it. And since this one is just a test, I'm not going to leave it as public. Okay. All right.
Yeah, there's been some other questions, but we're going to save them for the end because they might get answered.
Okay. All right, let me make sure I'm on my right.
You're good to go.
Here. Okay, good. All right, so now on to sort of the more in-depth stuff, the stuff that you are going to have to do some thinking about, and starting with the personal statement. What do you include in a personal statement? You are going to want to briefly describe why you are well suited for your role in the current project, the project that you're applying for. This could include parts of your training, previous experimental work, any technical expertise that you have, and so on. If you want to touch on any impediments to productivity, as they call it in the instructions, or I think as anyone else would call it, kind of life, you could do that here. This means they're referring to family care responsibilities, illness or disability, active military service. If there are gaps in between your education and your postdoc or something like that, gaps where you weren't productive, you could explain them here if you wanted to. As you are writing, you want to make sure that you're tailoring the statement that you're writing to the grant that you are applying for. So mention the project, the collaborators, discuss, you can here discuss ongoing and completed projects from the last 3 years, and any specific contributions to science that you don't include in section C, if it's something relevant. You can also mention past research grants or awards in this section if it's relevant, since you might have noticed that that research support section has been removed. You don't have to list them anymore. And finally, you can cite up to 4 publications or research products to highlight your experience and qualifications. And I know this is a question that came up in the chat earlier, whether you can do both of them. So yes, they say, as long as it's 4 citations, it can be publications or research products. So what is a research product? Anything on this list, which comes directly from the NIH, so articles, patents, conference proceedings, whether that's a poster, an abstract, if you have shared data, if you have created some software that you have made public, that could be considered a research product, and including preprints, as long as they are publicly available on a preprint server. So a manuscript that you are working on wouldn't be considered a preprint. A manuscript under peer review at a journal isn't considered a preprint unless it was also put into a preprint repository. You can mention those manuscripts under peer review, but you can't officially cite them. So what is not allowed? You cannot include figures, tables, or charts. And you can't include URLs or links for any of those research products that we just talked about. So as Tess mentioned, there is only one link that you are allowed to put in, and that is something that will come up in contributions to science, which is a link to your full bibliography. There are 2 sections in SciENcv for adding your personal statement. First, the text box where you can paste in the text that you've written, and then there's the citation choice area. So one of the nice things about linking to your My Bibliography and to your Orchid and keeping those up to date is that you can connect them with SciENcv to very easily fill in these citation sections. I will say I have found the My Bibliography link to be a little bit finicky at times. I don't know if it's just mine or if I've set something up oddly, but yesterday I could not get, as I was updating the slide, I could not get My Bibliography to connect to my the Biosketch that I was working on. So that this is one of my coworkers' images. However, because I had connected it to my Orchid was connecting to the SciENcv. So this isn't a problem all the time. Sometimes it's fine. I just want you to know that it's helpful to have these different things linked in case there is a hiccup. You can always have another choice, another option to save yourself a little bit of trouble. So one thing to note as you're choosing citations, again, I mentioned this a minute ago, the instructions state you can add up to 4 publications or research products. So just keep track of what you are citing. Okay. So now we're going to move on. I know that was really fast. Tess, are there any questions specific to that we can try to address?
Not at this time. I think you're good to go move forward for now. Okay.
All right. So I do want to say that section and this contribution to science section can be difficult to write. And so there are some tips later on that we'll go through, but also having kind of peer reviewers, asking a mentor to look it over, asking someone who has done this in your department before to look it over can also be really helpful. So please keep that in mind, that we would always suggest having a few different people help you out with this as you're trying to write these, especially if it's for the first time. Okay, contributions to science, our final section of the Biosketch to talk about. In this section, you want to describe up to 5 of your most significant contributions to science. For each, you want to summarize the background of the problem, the central findings, the influence these findings have had on the field, and your role in the work. Now, some things to think about here is, first of all, not everyone is going to have 5. As a grad student, you may be thinking, I don't have very much to add to this section, but really take some time to think about any previous projects you may have worked on in grad school or as an undergrad. Have you collaborated on any projects? Have you helped out other people on their projects? This is something we'll kind of come back to over the next few slides again and again. So each contribution should be no longer than half a page, including citations. And like in the personal statement, you can list up to 4 key publications or research products for each contribution. If an item overlaps with multiple contributions, those can be reused. And you have the option here to include a .gov link to a list of full published works that you can put into this section. So a link to your My Bibliography is what's recommended. And again, this is the only link that you are allowed in your Biosketch. You can use different metrics to help you tell your story about your contributions to science. This could include something fairly traditional like a citation count. You can also talk about how many times an item has been downloaded, social media mentions, news mentions. We can help you find that kind of information known as alt metrics. An example of how you could mention these metrics here. The paper describing this work is listed below and has been cited more than 100 times. That's information you can find in Scopus. Has been referred to by the news media 23 times and has received 60 Twitter mentions. Although it's Scopus here now, this is something that you can also often find in PubMed now too. But you want to be selective with what you use, provide context and explanation to make these metrics more meaningful. So what does that mean? If your work was mentioned in a policy, explain what the policy was for. Describe how your work was discussed. For example, this work was described as a breakthrough study on ALS by a prominent researcher. You could also highlight comments from news stories, mentions in policies or patents, or once you're running your own lab, the work of students that you have mentored. And we have a link here to our research impact guide that can give you some more information and some more tips on how you could use this type of information or this type of metric. A few tips for new researchers, whether you're a grad student, postdoc, or just getting started. First, on your language, consider your reviewer and keep your jargon to a minimum, since the reviewer might not be an expert in your direct field. Use a humble tone when discussing your contributions, and make sure that you're only including appropriate information. It's fine to focus in on 2 or 3 significant contributions. You don't need to list 5. And don't be scared away from thinking that you haven't made any contributions. Consider explaining contributions you've made to somebody else's research or how your contributions will be important. If you're a postdoc, you can discuss your doctoral work. Or if you have mentored students in your current lab or while you were doing your doctoral work. And if you haven't published, you can explain how you've contributed to other projects, such as I conducted the literature review for this paper under review, or I care for the animals in this lab. And the NIH wants you to keep in mind, we have this I'm taking this directly from their FAQ. In general, reviewers base their expectations for contributions on the seniority of the person filling out the biosketch. So a grad student's biosketch is not going to be looked at in the same way that a full professor's is. Some final, just sort of general writing tips. Use the first person. Break up the section with subtitles. So have a different subtitle for each contribution. Clearly summarize your role in that contribution and present them in a clear and logical order, whatever you decide that should be. And finally, as I mentioned before, get input from mentors and colleagues who have done this before, because this really is, a continuous process. Your biosketch is going to change as you move through your career. It's always a good idea to talk to somebody who has gotten the kind of funding that you are applying for. Take a look at what their biosketch looked like, what their contributions to science looked like, and get their opinion as to what you have written and how you can improve it. So SciENcv, again, makes it pretty straightforward to add your contributions to science. You'll choose add another contribution. It adds in these little tabs. Click on edit to add the description of your contribution. You can click select citations to add from your My Bibliography or from Orchid. And here is down here where you can add that link to your full My Bibliography. And so you want to make sure that you have that set to public as well. Okay, so those are our basics of creating a biosketch. A couple of final points. You can export your biosketch in a few different formats. I showed you that blue box before when we got asked about changing the sharing option. You can download it as a PDF, Word, or XML. We recommend trying not to export it to Word and doing edits there, because the power of SciENcv is that it can house all the different versions that you need, and you can keep them updated there so that it's always ready for you. But you can download a PDF to submit with your application. This slide has a handy checklist that you can refer to before you submit to make sure that your biosketch is compliant. We're going to be sending out these slides so you can refer back to this later. But it's always a good thing to look at before you send it in to make sure everything is there, everything is formatted correctly. And here are also some other helpful links. There's a lot of different information here, either from the NIH or from NCBI on working with SciENcv, or we have here in the library a number of resource guides that offer information on biosketches and SciENcv. So please do check this out to see if that answers questions that you have, or you can find some new information. If you found this workshop helpful, make sure to look for our seminars for 2022. Next up in January is more of a look at creating a data management and sharing plan, which will also be required for NIH grants going forward. And finally, we are always here to help you. Tess and I are 2 of the 4 librarians in the Research and Scholarly Communication Services Department. So please feel free to contact any one of us with questions. Thank you. So what other questions do we have? Let's see.
So we had some questions. So how would you edit a publication in My Bibliography of for the personal statement?
How would you edit something that's incorrect in My Bibliography, or?
If you wouldn't mind going over
Yeah.
how to add a citation from My Bibliography and how to edit a citation in My Bibliography, I think, as well.
Okay. All right. So let's first look at My Bibliography here. So I manually entered this item. So there's a button where I can click and I can edit the different information that's in here. If it's pulled directly from PubMed, I'm not sure that you can edit this particular part. You can't edit what's in it. You can only edit it if you have manually entered the item.
Yeah, but if you want to delete a paper from My Bibliography, how would someone do that, Kim?
You can click on it. You can go to Manage Citations and you can choose Delete Citations. I don't want to delete it, so I'm not going to, but this is how you can remove something. And I will say that I just did this the other day because occasionally, I also can't say as to why, citations will double up in your My Bibliography. I had a couple of these that I entered manually show up as doubles, and I'm not entirely certain what happened. So I just went through, made sure it was all the same information, deleted the extra citations. And it is good just to go through and look and make sure that it is all correct and that all of your citations have made it in there, especially if it's something that would not have been in PubMed to begin with. And then the second part of that question was,
so if you're in SciENcv, yep.
Let's take a look at this one. So you choose Select Citations. Again, it's not connecting with My Bibliography right now. I do not have a good answer as to why that is. It's a little confusing. And then the question is, how would you edit them here?
Yeah,
I would say you would, from here, you'd have to edit it within Orchid or within My Bibliography, and then you can choose which ones you want to be included by checking them off.
Great. And we had a question about using Google Scholar for the citation metrics. So and so you can use, there's no reason why you can't use Google Scholar for the citation metrics. Something to keep in mind, though, the source of the citation metrics, whether it's Scopus or Google Scholar, has different, is pulling from different sources. So Scopus is all academic journals, whereas Google Scholar is pulling from everything in Google Scholar, which includes posters and white papers and things that are not always published academic journals. So depending on the the meaning that you're trying to get across. Just think about that when you're choosing your metrics as well. And there's also a question regarding the personal statement, that mentoring used to be part of the Biosketch mentoring statement or personal statement, and is it still included? So I think in this case, yes, if there are, it is still included if that is relevant to the grant that you're applying for, to mention mentoring as part of the grant. Yes, included in your personal statement, and it is still accepted and still looked for. And we had a couple questions about. So we have one question here. What are the words next to the papers in My Bibliography?
Oh, let me go back. The words are
awards.
Oh, awards.
Yeah, so
the awards are going to be if the paper is associated with a NIH grant. Over here, it's asking, are you compliant with the public access mandate that the NIH has put out? So if a paper has research that was published by any type of NIH grant, it needs to be put into PubMed Central so that the paper is publicly available. And you have 3 months within the publication of that paper in which to make sure that that has made it to PubMed Central. And so these papers are not NIH funded, so it does not matter. So it says here, not applicable. Down here, paper from graduate school, it was funded. This is compliant because it is in PubMed Central.
And we had a question earlier while you're on that page. Do we have to list all of the, I'm sorry, I'm just trying to find the correct, should we list all awards that are funded academic research? So scholarships, T32s. So basically my rule of thumb when it comes to adding awards to the section is that if that award is stated in the article, it should be listed as an award in your My Bibliography as well. And I have, what if you have a paper that was funded by an agency that is not the NIH? Can you input that?
Input the paper or input the
award?
Yes.
So, or maybe both. Let's talk about both.
So, well, these are showing the awards that were associated with that paper that I just showed you. But as far as I know,
funding agency,
tell me
yes.
Yeah, tell me if I'm wrong. You can just add in any award that you have associated with that paper.
Generally, I believe it is just the NIH awards,
really? Okay,
but I will double check that,
okay.
and we will send out the answer.
Yeah.
And we are past the hour, so if people would like to stay on, I believe we have answered most of the questions. And there was a clarification that the postdoc should be entered as training and not as a position. And yeah, I think that was all the questions. So thank you so much for joining us today. Really appreciate all the engagement everybody had, and have a great rest of your week.